Well, good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight. We want to give just a couple of seconds for folks to join us. It is 7 o'clock here on the West Coast, which is important because in just a couple of minutes, I'll tell you why. Here on the West Coast at 7, it is 10 o'clock on the East Coast. That'll be important in just a moment. If this is your first time, welcome to our Friday Forum as presented by the Ambassadors Forum. This the first of 2021. And this is a monthly occurrence, and so we invite you to join us once a month for these events. I'm Brian Mengel. I'll be your online host tonight. The Ambassadors Forum vision is quite simple, to equip you as a believer to be firm in your faith, as well as to be able to be equipped for the work of the ministry, and also to be able to explain God exactly as he is. That's taken out of 1 John chapter 3, verse 2. The Ambassadors Forum provides and creates and presents content in various forms in the areas of science and scripture reliability, worldview, world religions, and current social topics. The Ambassadors Forum is also now on the radio every Saturday at 9:30 in the Portland area. You can listen at 800 AM True Talk. That's KBBQ. For those outside the Portland metro area, you can listen online at truetalk800.com, or you can utilize the iHeartRadio app. Tonight and always, we focus on young people because the next generation is where spiritual battles will be won or lost. So tonight, if you are a young person, we appreciate you joining us, giving that part of your Friday night. I want to pray real quick, and then we'll get right into some ground rules and tonight's speaker. So God, we just pause to thank you. We thank you for a new year. We thank you for being in control when things may seem out of control. God, we thank you for Josh, tonight's speaker. We appreciate, we're excited about technology and the ability to hear from someone who you've gifted with the ability to speak and be passionate and share about the issue of life. And so be with Josh and give him clarity tonight, and for us to have open minds and ears to hear. And in your name we pray, amen. So a couple of quick ground rules, really quick. During tonight's presentation, I hope that you're going to be inspired to ask further question. When you have a question for Josh, we're going to have a live Q&A right after he speaks. What we'd like you to do is send those questions to the Ask a Question chat. It's somewhere right here at the bottom. On the chat feature, select Ask a Question, send your question there, and then I will ask those questions to Josh, as many as I can, once he's done speaking. In advance, it's very possible we will not get to all the questions. If that happens, someone from the Ambassadors Forum will get back to you. We are once again being joined by folks, not just here in the Portland area, but across the West Coast and all the way to North Carolina tonight. As I mentioned, just a couple of ground rules. So imagine just for a moment having a pro-life conversation with 5,000 people who are all pro-choice. What might you say? How might they react? And is a meaningful, respectful, and opinion-changing outcome even possible? Well, tonight you're going to hear 6 practical dialogue tips for creating that kind of conversational culture and environment where people are most likely willing to change their mind to a pro-life point of view. Tonight's speaker is Josh Brahm. He's the president and co-founder of Equal Rights Institute, a nationwide organization training pro-life advocates. Josh has worked in the pro-life movement since he was 18. Josh has spoken in 6 countries and 22 of our 50 states. He and his wife, Hannah, and their 3 boys live in North Carolina. And tonight, the Ambassadors Forum goes coast to coast. So please welcome from across the country tonight's speaker, Josh Brahm.
Thank you so much for having me, Brian. It is really good to be here. It has been really great to get to know Roy as we've been doing a couple of radio interviews recently. I am jealous for all of you that just get to work with such great people who just care so much about apologetics. I am excited to be with you tonight to talk about one of my favorite topics. So let me give you a little bit of background on me and ERI, and then we'll just dive right in. I launched Equal Rights Institute 6.5 years ago because I wanted there to be a pro-life organization that was helping pro-life people to think clearly, reason honestly, and argue persuasively. And as we were doing all this work on college campuses, like a college campus is kind of our lab. We go there to test arguments with pro-choice people and find out what is working and what is not working, because truth never changes, right? Like truth is the truth. But as culture changes, the arguments that are persuasive, the arguments that actually get in there and change people's minds, can change as culture changes. And so we're just interested in what works right now, not what was persuasive to pro-choice people 20 years ago, what is working the best right now. And so as we were going out on the college campuses, we were finding sometimes the arguments that we used to use weren't working so well anymore. And then we would kind of stumble upon a new idea that would work really well. And so a lot of people, when they think about Equal Rights Institute, they think about philosophy. We're really into kind of getting deep and trying to help pro-life people to understand the strongest pro-choice arguments, not just the dumb ones, not just the lame bumper sticker slogans, but what are the smartest pro-choice people saying and why are they wrong? But that is not what tonight's talk is about. Tonight's talk is kind of about the other side of the spectrum. Instead of focusing on philosophy and smart arguments, today I just want to talk about the more relational side of dialogue. Because when you talk to someone about abortion, persuasion is psychological more than it is philosophical. They will remember more the way that you treated them than the exact arguments that you made. And so I've seen a lot of pro-life people who are well-meaning, and they will kind of win the battle, but if they were a jerk, then they lost the war. That person they talked to is not closer to the pro-life position because they found this person to be so off-putting. And right now, I don't know if any of you have noticed, but in the last year, it seems like civil discourse has gone to an all-time low, or at least an all-time low in my lifetime. People are having such a hard time being able to talk to each other about anything that they disagree about. It's not just about abortion. There's all kinds of issues right now that it's like we are so tribalistic. We all kind of like, it seems like everyone kind of hates the other side. The other side is bad. The other side is dumb. And so we can't have good conversations and we're not changing each other's minds. I think it's really important for us to be able to change people's minds because truth is really important. So tonight I'm going to share with you 6 of the most important dialogue tips that we've learned throughout going through that process, that fire, if you will, of 5,000 conversations. What are the things that are working? What are the things that are not working? Kind of like if there's a core Bible verse at the core of like what we do, it's this. It's Colossians 4:5-6, which says, conduct yourselves with wisdom toward outsiders, making the most of the opportunity. And then it says, let your speech always be with grace, as though seasoned with salt, so that you will know how you should respond to each person. And there's something cool about that verse is where it says how you should respond to each person. That implies what? That implies that we're not supposed to respond the exact same way to every person that we talk to. Like that means that evangelism done well is more than memorizing John 3:16 and the 4 spiritual laws and a few Christian bumper sticker slogans that you can say to anyone who will listen to you. Like it's more complicated than that. And so how can we be more like Jesus? I'm fascinated by the question, what would it look like if Jesus sat down with a pro-choice person? Like what would his body language be like? What kinds of questions would he ask? What would he not ask? What would it sound like when he made arguments that are grounded in truth, but spoken with gentleness and grace? Like I want to help the whole pro-life movement to get closer to that mark. And so these dialogue tips are going to, the whole point of all of these is to help bring this other person's defenses down. You know, you start a conversation, a dialogue like this where you disagree on the topic, their defenses are usually up. People do not want to have their minds changed. Like they are psychologically, like they're like, no, their walls are up. They're in defensive mode. They don't want that. And so even when on a college campus talking to strangers, I am using these dialogue tips to try to help them to feel like we're both friends, not strangers. Like we've been friends for a while and we're hanging out at a coffee shop talking this issue over in kind of a safe, like non-threatening, non-confrontational way. Because if I can get their defenses down, then they can hear me. They cannot hear me if they're super defensive. It doesn't matter how good and brilliant my arguments are. If they can't hear me, it doesn't matter. So I want them to be able to hear me and really engage with the things that I say so I can optimize, I can maximize the chances that their mind will be changed. So let's dive right in. Tip number 1, ask a lot of clarification questions. You want to ask a lot of clarification questions because, as my friend Steve Wagner has said, you don't actually know what this other person thinks, intends, or feels. We sometimes think we know, but we don't. We need to find out from them. This is kind of like we want to get into detective mode, as my friend Jonathan Fincher once said. Like, we should be authentically curious about this person. When I first start talking to a pro-choice person, I don't know very much about them. So I'm asking them, a lot of questions about their view. Like, what do you think about abortion? Do you think it should be legal through all 9 months or something less than that? That's not like a leading question. I'm just curious. I'm just trying to figure out where they are. Do you think that abortion should be legal for any reason? Or do you think that there should be some limits? Are there some reasons that women have abortions that they should not be allowed to have abortions? Like, I'm asking questions to try to get a sense of where they're coming from. And then after they answer those questions, then I'm going to go to tip number 2. And this might be one of the hardest tips of the whole list, okay? But it's really, really important, and it almost feels like a spiritual battle sometimes to be able to do this well, which is to silence your inner monologue. You need to silence your inner monologue. That's that little voice in your head. You know what I'm talking about? That you're thinking about your next argument or the next thing that you want to say when they finally stop talking. We all have that voice in your head. It's okay. It's not just you. This is all of us. You've got one probably going on right now while I'm talking. Okay. I get like that. We always have that. I'll be talking to a pro-choice person sometime, and in my head, I'm thinking, wow, those are a whole lot of arguments that she's making in a row like that. Which one should I respond to? Should I respond to the last thing that she ends up saying? Should I just respond to the first argument that she made in this string of things? Should I respond to the one that's the easiest to refute? Or should I pick the one that seems to be the most important to her? I'm hungry. What was that thing that my wife Hannah wanted me to do tonight? Like that's not listening, right? That I'm thinking about other stuff going on. And the problem is, I think most of us, myself included, overestimate how well we can listen while having an inner monologue going on in our head, right? Like we think that we're listening, but we're not doing as well as we thought. And I had to learn this lesson the hard way, okay? Because several years ago, I had to have a couple of very important conversations with my wife, okay? So guys, listen up. This tip's for free. I was making this dumb husband habit. I'd fallen into this dumb husband habit where I would get home from work and the kids would all want to play, but there's kind of this, we've got a rule. I'm gonna go talk to my wife first. So she might be in the kitchen making dinner or whatever, and we go in and we're talking about our days. And I fell into this dumb husband habit where sometimes she'd be telling me about her day, and I would also be browsing Facebook statuses on my phone. Now, I tell this story a lot in front of live audiences, and let me tell you, you can hear the air sucked out of the room, like the judgment across the room. And I believe the judgment across the country right now, as you're listening to me, I believe that you are judging me right now because everybody does. It's like, oh my gosh, what a terrible thing to do. And you're right. It was a terrible thing to do. That is not a good way to love my wife, but it was so innocent. I thought I was listening because I could tell that she was, talking. And I was like kind of following the themes and just thinking that I was doing a great job. But then she would ask me like basically a comprehension kind of a question, and it'd be like busted. I would like fail miserably, and she would be frustrated, as she should have been. That was not a very good way to love my wife. And so I had to learn from that, okay, I actually can't do this thing where I'm really tracking with her while doing something as mindless as browsing Facebook statuses. Here's the point. It is obvious, I think, to everyone on here that I shouldn't be on Facebook while my wife's talking to me. And yet, probably all of us will be having a philosophical conversation with someone who disagrees about a complicated topic. And we will be in our heads thinking about the next thing that we ought to say, thinking that we are really listening. And we're not. And so this is the spiritual discipline that I'm trying to do. I'm trying to put that little voice in my head on mute. I'm trying to turn that off. When I'm talking to this pro-choice person, I just want to be present in the moment with her. I want to be like 100% actively listening, not passively, actively listening to everything that she is saying. And then after she's done, I might have to take a few beats and just process, because I've not been doing that simultaneously. Okay, now I've got to think about that. And some pro-lifer watching us have this conversation might be like, ooh, this is an awkward pause. No, this is an awesome pause, because it is showing this person what? It's showing her that I'm taking her seriously, that I'm taking her ideas seriously. And people are not used to that. Not anymore. People are not expecting you, a Christian conservative, presumably, to take her ideas seriously. And what if we could change that paradigm? What if in 5 or 10 years, Christians and conservatives were known as the group that understood the other side the best and truly listened to them and paid attention to what they were saying and processed that before coming to our conclusion? I think that would have a hugely helpful impact on our society. Okay, tip number 3, find genuine common ground when possible. Find genuine common ground when possible. My friend Steve Wagner has a wonderful little book on this called Common Ground Without Compromise. Because a lot of people think you can't find common ground with pro-choice people. It's either this is black or white. You either think that abortion is baby murder or you don't. And the thing is, I've talked to a lot of pro-choice people. And most of the pro-choice people that I talk to think that abortion's a bad thing. They think that it should happen less often. They think that it hurts some women. And they think that some abortions are so wrong that they should be illegal, that they should be against the law. Some of them, like late-term abortions, for example. Well, I agree with all of the statements that I just made. But it's our job to point that out. Like, common ground is going to happen almost throughout any conversation you have with someone that you disagree with, like in general on a topic. It is almost never the case that you're actually talking to like pure evil psychopath, like where there's just like no common ground. Like, it just doesn't really happen. And so we should be listening for those things that we agree with. And instead of just kind of moving right along and just focusing on the things that we disagree with, we will talk about that. I'm going to get into that in the next tips. But before we do that, acknowledge any common ground that is there, that they just said. I am not letting one of those go by without some kind of acknowledgement. And I might say it verbally. I might say, I agree with what you said there. Oh, I like that. I'm with you there. So like, I might literally say it, or I might sometimes do it with, nonverbal noises, like, oh yeah, like that kind of thing, or just by body language, especially for like face to face, in a post-COVID world when I finally get to go and talk to people face to face again. They can tell, because I'm being very intentional with my body language, but I want them to understand that we have some common ground, because they are not usually expecting that. A pro-choice person talking to a pro-life Christian guy like me, they're not expecting to find any common ground. And as I point out that common ground, it starts feeling possible to them that maybe we could make some progress. I don't seem so crazy to them when they realize, oh no, there's a lot of things in here that we agree on. And then it's easier to talk about the things that we disagree on. The analogy that my friend Steve Wagner makes on this is that common ground is kind of like fuel in a car. If you're going to take a long road trip if you were going to, get in the car and you knew we were going to be driving kind of all day, you're going to probably start by filling up the tank. And then you're going to get on the road for a while and you're going to drive for a while. And then at some point you're going to stop at a gas station again, right? Like that's what we do. That's kind of like common ground. Is I want to try to start a conversation with as much common ground as I can. And then we're going to talk about the things that we disagree about for a while. And then as we go, I'm going to continue pointing out that common ground. And it's going to help the conversation, the entire conversation, to go better. Tip number 4, rephrase what they said. Rephrase what they said. The more that I talk to pro-choice people, the more amazed I am at the huge cultural gap that there is between pro-life and pro-choice people. And so, I am working really hard to make it so that they understand what I'm saying. I want to speak as clearly as I can, but it's also important for me to try to make sure that I am accurately understanding what they say. Because what I really don't want to do is I don't want to straw man them. Straw man is a term you'll hear sometimes people use for this idea called the straw man fallacy, which is when you either accidentally or intentionally attack not their argument, but a dumber argument than the one that they're making. You're attacking this man made of straw, this kind of easy to take down argument. Everyone does that to each other all the time, especially like if you watch political debates on Facebook or Twitter, like it's mostly straw man things that you're seeing. Okay. It's just like all the time. And it's really obnoxious. And I don't want to do that to people. And even if I'm listening really carefully, it's possible for me to still misunderstand what they're saying. Because as we're listening to people, our minds are like psychologically what is going on in our mind is we're sort of categorizing their arguments. We're kind of filing them away and even rephrasing their arguments to ourselves. And so it's kind of like our brain is doing Google Translate. I don't know if any of you have seen these videos. They're not very popular anymore, but for a while, like several years ago, there was this kind of fad for a while where musicians would make these YouTube parody videos where there would be like a music video cover. They would take some famous song, like Let It Go from Frozen. But what they would do first is they would take the lyrics and they would translate them on Google Translate. They go from like English to Spanish, and then they would take those lyrics and they'd like from Spanish to French, and then they would loop that back around to English, and then they would sing those lyrics to the original music track, and they would put it out. And it's always funny because Google Translate is not perfect, especially like the more iterations that you have it go, the further from the original translation it gets, because it's not perfect, and neither is our brain. And so to kind of try to make sure that I don't strawman this person, I will often say something like this. I'll say, I want to make sure I'm understanding you. Let me repeat back to you what I heard you say, so then you can correct me if I've gotten it wrong. It sounded to me like you said, blah, 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 right? And then I'm going to try to put what I hear them saying in my own words and express it kind of as well as I can. And then I'm going to let them tell me, did I get it right or not? And I might have to do this process several times before I get it right. And that's okay. People have complicated views about abortion, and it is well worth a few minutes of my time to understand her view instead of just responding to a carbon copy picture in my head of what pro-choice people think. Okay, so tip number 1 was ask clarification questions. Tip 2 was silence your inner monologue. Tip 3 was to find genuine common ground when possible. And tip 4 was to rephrase what they said. Let's move on to tip 5. Say what you don't mean. Say what you mean and say what you don't mean. So this is where this is like the other side of the coin of the last tip. So in the last tip, I am trying to understand them as well as I can. And in this tip, we are trying to make them understand us or optimize their chances of them understanding us. In other words, like I am trying to bring as much clarity as possible to this conversation. A conversation where probably most people don't have a lot of clarity in these conversations. And a lot of people, I think, like apologists will sometimes kind of feel like, well, we have like a 50-50 role. and clarity. And I don't agree with that. I've been thinking about abortion professionally for 20 years now. If I'm talking to a pro-choice person, frankly, it's not a fair fight. I don't think of it as one. And so I'm willing to bear more of the responsibility. I'm trying to make clarity completely my responsibility, in fact. And so that's why sometimes, to try to help them to not accidentally strawman me, I'm going to do this little pattern sometimes where I'm going to say, here's what I'm not saying, and here's what I am saying. And so like I'm paying attention to likely ways they might misunderstand me. And that kind of comes with experience. The more you talk about a certain topic, the more you're going to see, oh, there's like this difference in language. Pro-life and pro-choice people sometimes use the same words differently. Pro-life and pro-choice people use the word human, for example, often to mean something different, or human being. They mean different things when they use those words. They don't necessarily realize that, but sometimes they're talking past each other, but they're using almost like a little bit of a different language. And so here's a few examples of what that might sound like when I do it. I might say, I don't think it's as wrong to kill an animal as it is to kill a human. I am not saying that it doesn't matter how we treat animals, like that it's not immoral to torture them. I'm just saying they aren't equal to us. So I said, here's what I'm saying. Here's what I'm not saying. Here's what I'm saying, right? Here's another example. I think it's as wrong to kill a human embryo as it is to kill a human toddler, because they're equally human. I'm not saying that a woman that has an early abortion is sinning as greatly as a woman that strangles her toddler to death. Don't get me wrong. Abortion's a really bad sin and it's terribly destructive. But I think you have to have a different level of malice to strangle a toddler. Similarly, it would be easier to push a button that you know will kill someone halfway around the world than it would be to strangle someone with your own hands. It doesn't mean that the two potential victims aren't equally valuable, equally deserving of protection. Here's what I'm saying. Here's what I'm not saying. Here's one more example. Here's what I'm not saying. Moral relativists cannot be kind, moral people. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that moral relativism cannot explain why anyone should be moral. Here's what I'm not saying. Here's what I'm saying. Lately, I have also found myself clarifying what I'm not saying when I use thought experiments. When I'm getting more into kind of philosophy mode and trying to help them understand my argument, I'm often like trying to help them figure out how might they screw up my analogy in their head. Because a lot of times people just have a hard time tracking with analogies, and they compare the wrong things, or they just take it the wrong way. So like I am actively trying to figure out how can they misunderstand me so that I can like cut it off at the pass and just like solve the problem before it even really comes up. And then we don't have to have all of those kind of like, it's like what I just imagined like is like driving, like you're hitting potholes. I want to minimize how many potholes in the conversation that that we kind of ran into. Okay, tip number 6. I'm going to spend a little bit of more time on this one because it's a little bit complicated, but I want to take a little bit of time with this, which is to avoid arguments with question marks. Avoid making arguments with question marks on them that have a question mark at the end of the argument. And this is an area where we are, this is pretty different than what a lot of my colleagues teach in apologetics, whether it's pro-life apologetics or Christian apologetics. So this is an area of respectful agreement. I love, I've got a lot of really, really smart people that are in the same line of work. And this is just pretty specific to the ERI style of dialogue that we have found to be the most effective. I have become convinced in the last 2 years that in almost any case of a person changing her mind on something significant, a necessary condition of her changing her mind was that she felt emotionally safe. Now, I want to be clear. I am not saying the kind of sensitivity that many college students have is justified. There are some recent cases on college campuses that border on the surreal. I'm also not saying let's be wimpy about telling hard truths to people. What I am saying, so I'm just doing it now. Here's what I'm not saying, and here's what I am saying. I'm not saying let's be wimpy. What I am saying is let's not be idiots in the way that we present hard truths to people, because it is foolish and short-sighted to just blast people with the truth with no thought to how they are going to respond to it. The gracious, sensitive person speaking truth is far more likely to make a positive impact than the abrasive, thoughtless person speaking the same truth. Let me say that again. It is foolish and short-sighted to just blast people with the truth with no thought as to how they're going to respond, because the gracious, sensitive person speaking truth is far more likely to make a positive impact than the abrasive, thoughtless person speaking the same truth. So we're not recommending people use arguments with question marks anymore, unless they have built a lot of rapport with the person. And here's why. It often makes the person feel like he's being Socratized, and people don't like that. It's really interesting. I've been teaching on this for the last 5 years or so. And in that process, I've had a lot of people come up to me and tell me kind of their reaction to this. And I've had both salespeople, so people who work in sales for a living, as well as family therapists come up and tell me about how they have been learning the exact same thing in their occupational fields, where they have been finding that leading questions that feel leading, like they make the other person feel like they're leading them somewhere, annoy people at best and shut them down at worst. And if we shut them down, if we make them feel like, oh, I feel like he's trying to like trap me, right? He's going to try to corner me. I don't know why he's answering this. He's asking this question, but I don't want to answer it because I feel like it's going somewhere. I don't know where it's going, but it's going somewhere. And then they just kind of like, they're stuck. When we do that, we like, now they have another wall come up. That's a problem. Remember what I said in the beginning. We're trying to bring their walls down. And so if we're talking to someone who already has their wall up, and then we, with like good intentions, but sort of accidentally do a thing in the conversation that makes another wall go up, then it's kind of like one of my favorite scenes in Return of the Jedi. Okay, so I'm going to get nerdy here for a second. You guys remember Star Wars: Return of the Jedi? There's a scene. They're on the forest moon of Endor. They're having this big old battle. They're trying to get into this Imperial base that they need to blow up. And there's this blast shield. There's this huge metal door that's blocking the entrance. They need to get in. There's this laser fight going on. And so they got to hack into this thing. So R2-D2, the droid, goes to hack into this thing and do this hacking thing that he does. And then this really crazy thing happens where the first stormtrooper to ever hit anything in his life hits R2-D2. R2-D2 is down for the count. And so then Han Solo, the cool roguish figure, kind of shrugs his shoulders and says, I guess I'll hotwire it. Because apparently the Imperial Empire is using the same technology as old cars. So Han Solo opens up this panel and he starts like crossing these wires. And then there's this kind of little gag moment they put into the movie where instead of the door opening, a second layer of doors close in. That's what we're doing. That's what we do when we come up to a person who's all defensive, and then we start asking them questions that feel leading to them, and then this other wall goes up. So we don't want to do that. Instead, we want to have a different attitude about our conversations. Here's our attitude when we're in a conversation. We are trying to use the worst poker strategy ever. Let me explain with a story. A couple of years ago, my brother Tim and I had 15 meetings with the same Mormons, with the same Latter-day Saints missionaries. It wasn't this thing that like I seeked out, like looking for this. It was just like this thing happened where there's this one Saturday. It was like the first Saturday in a month that I was home and not on the road speaking. And I just wanted to relax. And the doorbell rings and I open the door and it's Mormons, And I wasn't excited. I'll totally admit to you, and I'm ashamed of this. In that moment, I was more concerned about my rest than I was about their souls. Okay. And it wasn't a good moment for me. And it's like, oh gosh. And luckily, they were charming and pushy enough to get into my house. And so pretty soon they're in my living room, they're sitting on my couch, and we're having this conversation. And the Holy Spirit did something to my heart. And pretty soon I'm really enjoying this conversation. I'm glad that we're talking, and I start loving them better. Anyway, we had a great first meeting, and they decided they wanted to come back. So I invited them back, and we ended up having 15 meetings. And they only ended because we moved across the country. We moved from California to North Carolina, where we are now. And so they're really good meetings. But I'm going to tell you something that happened towards the end of the series of meetings. So we had 3 back-to-back meetings debating the Trinity. You see, people in the LDS Church don't believe in the Trinity the way that Christians do. And so we kind of, that was our topic for 3 meetings. And the first meeting, it didn't go that well. It went the way it often goes when Christians debate topics. Like, we were kind of like throwing proof texts at each other. Like, we would give them some interesting verses, and they wouldn't really react to those verses. They would just be like, well, what about our verse? You know, that kind of thing. Have you ever had one of those conversations? Probably. Okay, so that was the first meeting. And, you know, my brother Tim and I, we would kind of like brief and debrief, you know, at the beginning and end of all these meetings. And I remember we were having this conversation before the next meeting, after we'd had that debate about the Trinity. And I said, I wonder if we should like change strategies at some point, like assuming tonight goes the way that it did last time. What if we tried like, you know, kind of changing? And so we kind of discussed a strategy. And ultimately, Tim would end up proposing a strategy. So at the end of the second meeting, when kind of the same thing happened again, Tim says, all right, guys, well, I know we've got to wrap up, but I'm not ready to give up on us talking about the Trinity. I want you, like, when you guys come back in a couple of weeks, I want us to do one more night talking about the Trinity. I'm not ready to give up on this one yet. But I want to do it differently. Let's do this David and Goliath style. You bring your 2 strongest verses about not the Trinity, the anti-Trinity or whatever. We'll bring our 2 strongest verses for the Trinity, and we'll kind of let those verses duke it out, and we'll see if we can figure out who has the best view. And here's the thing. So, I mean, you get to spend the next 2 weeks studying up. You get ready, you figure out what your 2 best verses are. But I am actually going to tell you right now what are the 2 verses that I am going to bring to the debate. I'll give you our 2 verses too. Pull out a pencil. And one of these kids whips out a pencil and a little pocket notepad thing so fast. I had never seen, this was meeting 11. Okay, I had never seen him take notes. He whips this thing out and he's writing down, and Tim is giving them not only like the verses, like you're like chapter and verse of the verses, he's telling them in syllogism form how he's going to make an argument with those verses for the Trinity. And they're like scribbling so fast, I feel like I can see smoke coming up from the pencil, right? And I'm looking and I'm seeing, and they're like sitting at the edge of my couch. They are hanging on every word that Tim is saying. They hadn't done that before. Why? Because this is not how people debate. People don't do this. Like Trump and Biden did not do this before the debate several months ago. They didn't like hang out in the green room like, I'm going to make these arguments and, you know, okay, cool, I'll take like, they weren't sharing notes with each other, okay? That's not how it's done. But this is not a debate. None of us on this call probably do like actual debates. I mean, I've done a few, like, you know, where there's podiums and an audience. That's a totally different thing. We're talking about dialogue. This is like, it's you and this other person. There's no audience. There's no winners or losers. There's no points. It's just like you're both on the same team. That's the way you ought to think about it. You're on the same team and you're trying to find truth together. And hopefully by the end of this process, you will cumulatively have come to believe more true things and fewer false things between the two of you, right? And so they were paying really close attention because like our thing was, there's nothing up our sleeve, right? You can have the advantage. Here's our arguments. Now you go study up, Mormons. You go take the next couple of weeks and find your 2 strongest verses and your best counter arguments to our 2 strongest verses, because we're not afraid of it. If we're right, then we don't need to be afraid of giving you this like advantage. Like come on, like bring it. Like, let's have a great discussion. And you know, the next conversation did go a lot better. But the point is, like, if you do this thing where you're just really kind of transparent about what your argument is when you make your argument, they're paying attention and they don't feel defensive about it. They're like, oh, okay, that's interesting. And then you can invite them to come back at you. So let me give you one more story. Here will be my final story, and then we'll jump into Q&A. I was at Portland Community College in your neck of the woods several years ago. I was there on April 20th, on 420, on pot day. I don't know how every pot day I end up on a college campus. It's just this thing that has kind of happens. It's this weird pattern. We don't do it on purpose, but there are like multiple times we'll be doing an outreach and we'll set up our table and then we're like, oh, it's April 20, okay. So we're at Portland Community College. You know what I'm talking about. On pot day, and campus smelled interesting. And we had this table set up. It was like not a very pretty part of campus. I don't know how many of you have been on Portland Community College. We were not outside, we were inside. It was kind of an ugly looking, like our pictures from the outreach weren't pretty, but it was the best spot on campus because we were right in front of the cafeteria. So anytime anyone got hungry or got the munchies, they had to come through us and they had to have a conversation. It was great. So I ended up talking to this really short girl that I will call Ariel. That's not her real name, but just to anonymize it, I'm just going to call her Ariel for the sake of this. And she's like 5'0", okay? And so what I did, like we set up our display, we call it a pool table. We just basically have a folding table, and we set up a sign on the top that has a big question on it. Something like, should abortion remain legal? And then we'll set up kind of a poll. We'll have like the dope pads, or maybe we'll do something with like ping pong balls, or just some way for people to vote. And we'll have a yes option and a no option and an it depends option. And people can just come up. We are inviting them to come over and participate in the poll. It's not a real poll. It's not statistically relevant. It's just a invitation. We're fishing for conversations. Come over here. And we try to engage them in a conversation, right? Okay, so I'm talking to Ariel. And because he's so short, I'm literally sitting on the table because it makes me shorter. I'm kind of a tall guy, and I don't like it when tall guys lord their height over short women, okay? And so I'm just like sitting on the table, and it shows like I'm relaxed, I'm chill, and we're having this great conversation. She's super pro-choice. She's making very strong arguments for her position, and I'm asking a lot of clarification questions, and then I'm occasionally countering with a pro-life argument, and then she comes back at me, and so that's going on. And then Gabriel showed up. Not the angel. Something else. Gabriel is, and I'm not being hyperbolic, okay? I have been doing this most of my life. Gabriel is the most obnoxious pro-life person I have ever spent time with on a college campus. And I've been around a lot of obnoxious pro-lifers, okay? But this guy takes the cake. I'm going to describe him for you. Gabriel is super tall. He's like 6'5". He's got a really short, like military style haircut, and he's wearing a full-length black leather trench coat, like Neo from the Matrix, which is not a thing, okay? That's not like a thing that people wear, but that's what Gabriel is wearing. He's pro-life. He walks up to this table and he sees I'm talking to Ariel, and he's like, and he had one look on his face the entire time. He hung out for a couple of hours. I really wanted him away from my outreach, and I could not get him to go away because he didn't like me either. And he had this one look on his face, one expression the entire afternoon. And his expression said, I don't know if you've seen someone have this look on their face, but his look said, I am the smartest entity within 100 yards of this place. So I'm going to play with you now, Mouse, for my own amusement. Okay, that's the look that Gabriel had glued to his face. So he walks up, he sees that I'm talking to Ariel, he gets like directly across from her in fight mode. And he gives her this condescending look and says, do you believe this? And I don't remember how the question ended, but the subtext was, this stupid thing that pro-choice people believe. And then he followed up with a second one. And do you also believe this other stupid thing that pro-choice people believe? And I looked at Ariel and I could just see her shut down right in front of me. And I said, pause. Let's have a meta discussion. Let's have a discussion about the discussion. Okay, Ariel, we're two pro-life men, clearly. Which one of us is more likely to change your mind? And Ariel instantly said, you. And I said, why? I want to know why. I'm really interested in persuasion. Tell me why you think I am more likely to change your mind. And so he had two answers. First, he said, I like your body language. I was sitting on the table. I was relaxed. I was chill. This guy was all like standing directly across from her, like he's ready to go. And then she said, and I like the kinds of questions you ask. I was only asking clarification questions. And then when it was time for me to make an argument, I just made my argument. Okay, here's the reason I'm still pro-life. Now come back at me. Help me understand why I'm wrong. Well, this guy was only asking obnoxious leading questions. Now, to be fair, he was particularly obnoxious. Most people are not as obnoxious as Gabriel. But I think when we ask questions that come across as leading, for example, well, if X is true, then shouldn't Y be true also? Or wouldn't Y also be true? There's usually words like shouldn't, wouldn't, like they are leading somewhere. Then the person shuts down because they don't want you to lead them somewhere. They want to kind of be able to figure it out for themselves. And so if we can get good at just ask a lot of clarification questions, but then when it's time for you to make an argument, just make your argument and end it with a period. And then invite them to respond to you. That, I believe, you will find will have a really great impact on your conversations, whether you're talking about abortion or whether you're having conversations with your spouse or your kids or anyone about any of the other issues that people are debating right now. Okay, Brian, I am ready for questions.
Okay, outstanding. Just for those maybe, we've got 57 folks joining us on devices. This is who you're talking about.
That's him.
Okay, I just want to make sure everyone could see that this is Neo from the Matrix. I mean,
It's not a good look.
Not a good look.
Only Keanu Reeves can pull it off. Okay, Gabriel could not pull it off.
I know. I mean, when you talked about him, I'm like, I got to pull a picture of this guy. All right. Anyway, enough about the Matrix. It's like we're getting paid for the Matrix. All right, folks. If you've been watching, you've been listening, you've been taking feverish notes like I have. Now it's time to take it from the when the rubber hits the road. How do we apply this? What questions are churning in your head? And so we want to encourage you to click on the chat and send your question now to ask a question. And we'll get those questions. I'll be able to ask them live here in a moment. So really quickly off the top here, in general, have you found it easier to change the minds of women or men when it comes to abortion? And why do you think that is?
That's a great question. For me, so there's a tricky thing for any man doing a pro-life outreach like on a college campus like me. Basically, every single conversation I have, I'm going to have to try to demonstrate why I should even get to talk about it at all. Because I'm a dude. It's like, you're a man. Why should you get to tell women what to do with their bodies? So on its face, on average, probably I find pro-choice men to be easier for me to persuade because I don't have to deal with that. We can just kind of get right through that. We're both two men talking about abortion. Let's have the conversation. Whereas a lot of times women, we've got to kind of deal with that first. And we're really good at dealing, but we've got a really good response to that. But it's kind of just like this one other thing. And so if the woman's coming up really angry that I'm even a dude and how dare I talk about this, then that is sometimes kind of a hard hurdle to get over. Having said that, I've always been one of those guys where like most of my friends are women, even like growing up, like my entire life, the majority of my friends have been girls. I've just related better to women. I'm a musician. I'm emotionally sensitive. I've never been like very dude masculine, like not good at sports. I don't really care about sports. So if we can get past that, I have found a lot of pro-choice women to be surprised that they enjoy talking to me. Once they kind of get a chance to get to know me a little bit. But like if I have to like pick, if I see like a pro-life man and a pro-choice woman walking up to the table, I'm probably secretly hoping that I end up in the conversation with a guy just so that it's probably going to be easier to get to the core of the conversation faster.
Awesome. Let's talk about questions. A couple of folks in the chat are wondering about If you could give some examples of leading questions to avoid, and then conversely, some questions that you ought to ask right out of the gate.
Yeah. So leading questions often, so again, so they usually have words like shouldn't or wouldn't in them. So something like, well, if the unborn is a part of the woman's body, then wouldn't that mean that a woman, while she's pregnant, has two noses and four eyes and half the time working male genitalia? Like, wouldn't that also be true if a fetus is part of a woman's body? See us kind of leading that way. There's one sort of like an anti-evolution one that I heard an apologist use that where he would say, if there was a big bang, then wouldn't there need to also be a big banger? Like, wouldn't there need to be some kind of cause, some first cause to the big bang? So it's something like that. If X is true, then wouldn't Y also be true? Or if X is true or right, then shouldn't Y also be? It's usually kind of that formula. Questions that I'm asking out of the gate are all clarification questions. If this is in the beginning of the conversation, I'm just trying to get to know them. I'm trying to get a sense of what their views are about abortion. And I'm exploring their worldview. I'm trying to explore the edges of their view. Both sides kind of do this with each other, I think, naturally. This is why pro-choice people ask pro-life people, by the way, about the case of rape and life of the mother all the time. It is not just to pin you in a corner. They're trying to figure out the edges of your view. In other words, like, how extreme is your view, or how consistent is your view? There's nothing wrong with that. I do the same thing. I am asking them about late-term abortion right away. I want to know, are they an abortion extremist, or do they only think that some abortions should be legal? So I'm asking about that. I'm asking about timing and circumstances. How many months do they think abortion should be legal till, and under what circumstances? Is there any reason that a woman should not be allowed to have an abortion? What if she wanted to have an abortion just because her baby has Down syndrome? And isn't that ableist if she does? Or, what if she wanted to have an abortion because they were really hoping to have a boy and they find out she's a girl, and so they want to abort so they can have a boy? Like, can we at least agree that's really messed up? I'm asking questions like that, and then as they make their arguments, I'm asking clarification questions about their arguments, or like the wording that they use, because I'm trying to make sure that I'm accurately understanding them. I'm trying to do that before I counter. Sometimes I screw up and I forget, and I'm just excited to make my counter argument. But on my best days, or in my best moments, I am taking some time and trying to like kind of test to see how accurately am I understanding them before I make that counter argument.
Josh, we were talking before we went live tonight that this questions will trickle, and then it's like a floodgate, and so that is happening right now. So I'm going to ask you on these next couple of questions if you could be brief, a little more brief, because we've got some really good ones coming up. One specifically talking about Catholics, one about real Christians and a pro-choice point of view. But I want to jump to this person here who has a really specific question. They love your tips and the conversation tonight. What they're wondering is, can you give us a longer, I just asked you to be short, a longer conversation with a pro-choice person? Like, what did that actually sound like? The tips, again, are great, but like, right, what did that actually sound like when you engage with a pro-life person? How'd that go?
Yeah, so I'll tell you a little bit about, or I'll share with you like a moment from that conversation with Ariel that I had right before Gabriel came up. So one of the things that Ariel said was that she thought that abortion needed to be legal because of poverty. There are a lot of women that are very poor, and it's like a crisis for them if they get pregnant. We need abortion for that. So here's an example of how I responded to that by putting my cards on the table face up, like that worst poker strategy thing. I said, first, I found some common ground. Yes, you are right. There are some women that are too poor to have a child, and they're like living paycheck to paycheck, or maybe they're going deeper and deeper into debt. And this is like, feels like a real crisis to them. And I said, like, look, I want to ask you a question. Might sound kind of weird to you. I said, Imagine a family had, like a large family, and they are having a hard time making the budget work. And then they decide the only way they're going to be able to make the budget work is to kill the youngest one. Let's say they've got a 2-year-old and they kill the 2-year-old to solve the budget problem. I'm sure we would agree that's wrong, right? And she's like, yeah. And I said, okay, so here's what's going on for me. As a pro-life person, like I don't want people to be poor. Like when you brought up poverty, I've got like two simultaneous things that happened in my mind. First, I felt sad, truly sad about people in poverty. And we could have a whole conversation about what our society ought to do to try to minimize poverty and help people get out of that situation. The other thing I wondered was, would this be a good reason to kill a toddler? Because here's the thing going on for me as a pro-lifer is I think that the unborn is morally equal to a toddler. Like I think they're morally the same. There's differences. I just don't think that the differences matter. And so because I think that they're morally the same, I don't think, and I don't think that you can kill a toddler for poverty. I don't think you can kill the unborn either, because they're both the same. So that's what's going on for me. So come back at me. Help me understand what's wrong with my view. So this is like a quick example. Like I'm totally willing to make arguments. We've got an amazing argument called the equal rights argument that I don't have time to explain in a short answer. But I definitely once I'm ready, I make a really strong philosophical argument because I've built up that rapport and they are able to hear that argument. And then when I do, they are a lot more likely to become pro-life or become closer to the pro-life position as a result.
All right, here we go. Let's go rapid fire as best you can. Question is, how many real Christians do you think are pro-choice? And do you have any specific tips for talking with them?
I don't know how many real Christians there are. Sometimes I'm pessimistic about how many. But if by real Christian the meaning is like how many people are gonna end up in heaven, as opposed to I think the most terrifying chapter in the Bible, the parable of the sheep and the goats, where God says, the person like I knew you, God, I thought I knew you. It's like depart from me, I never knew you, but I did all these things. No, it doesn't matter. So I don't know how many real Christians there are. I do know that there are a segment of Christians, and I don't have the latest poll numbers in my head, but there are certainly some self-identifying Christians who identify as pro-choice. But it's not even obvious how they are using that label. Like the words pro-life and pro-choice can mean different things to different people, but certainly some Christians are. And with a Christian pro-choice person, the only difference with them, like the way that I talk to an atheist, is that I'm more likely to use Bible verses. Like I'm not going to use Bible verses with an atheist. They don't care what the Bible says. I do, but they don't. So I'm using philosophy and science in my arguments with an atheist. With a pro-choice Christian, if I feel that they really do take the Bible seriously, then I might go to things like Psalm 139 and Jeremiah 1:5 and talking about how second trimester John the Baptist kicked in his mother's womb in the presence of first trimester Jesus. Like I can make a powerful biblical argument for the pro-life position. The human beings are made in God's image. That makes us intrinsically valuable. The Bible says that the shedding of innocent blood is strictly forbidden. And since the unborn are human beings made in God's image, the shedding of their blood is strictly forbidden. Like it doesn't have abortion in the Bible, but it also doesn't say it's wrong to throw people into shark tanks. It doesn't have to show like here's every way to kill that is wrong. Like I can just say it's wrong to kill without justification. I'm not going to do that with a pro-choice atheist, but I might with a Christian, depending on whether I think that's going to be the most effective thing to try with them.
Next question would be, in your opinion, why are Catholics in general more vocal and active in the pro-life movement?
That's a great question. I think a lot of that has to do with history. So Catholics were way quicker to fight abortion than Protestants were. I'm a Protestant, so to Protestants' shame, we were late to the game. And Catholics were pretty quick, like by the early 80s, from my understanding, the Catholic Church was fighting abortion, and Protestants now are kind of getting into it. I think 40 Days for Life, as far as I can tell, has done the best job of bringing more Protestants into the pro-life movement. And now we have more of an ecumenical movement. But But the pro-life movement is getting more diverse in general. There's also more atheists who are joining the pro-life movement, and there are more Democrats joining the pro-life movement. There are more gay people joining the pro-life movement now than before. So the pro-life movement is getting more diverse, which is really good. That's helpful for pro-choice people to see that it's not just a, white Catholic thing. It's just not, you don't have to be religious to be pro-life. But I think it's pretty historical. Like, Catholics have an authority structure that's different than most Protestant denominations outside of things like Eastern Orthodoxy. And so if the Pope says that abortion's wrong and the United States Council of Catholic Bishops says abortion's wrong, then Catholics are supposed to believe that. Now, not all of them do, but they're supposed to, the way their the way their theological structure is set up.
Next question. You touched on this maybe a couple of answers ago, but specifically, how do you diffuse the resistance from women who don't think men should have a voice in the abortion conversation?
Yeah, so we have a thought. We've tried like 8 or 9 different responses to this. Here's the one that we found to be really effective. It's a thought experiment. If she says, you're a man, you shouldn't have a right to talk about abortion, I'll say, okay, you're right, I am a man, that's true. You've correctly gendered me. But here's why I think that it's okay for me to talk about abortion. I'm interested in what you think about this. Imagine I was fishing at a lake and I look over to my left, and down the bank, I see something weird. I see a woman pushing her car into the lake. And I look closer and I see that there's a baby strapped to the car seat in the back seat. So what's actually going on is this woman is going through a major postpartum depression, something that I, as a man, can never truly understand. I can have sympathy, I can have empathy. I've got friends who've experienced postpartum depression, but you and I both know that I, as a man, can't really understand what that's like. And so that's going to affect how I feel about her. I'm not going to feel all angry and judgy and ew, how dare you? Like that kind of, I'm not going to feel like that. I'm going to be like, what is going on for this poor person that feels like she's trapped and this is like the only option in front of her? Like, I want to get her help. I'm also going to get into the water and I'm going to try to save the kids. So I'm going to try to help them both. And that seems reasonable to me, even though I'm a man and I can't understand postpartum depression. Similarly, I think our society is super confused about the unborn. And to be fair, they're a really confusing segment of the population. Like, a lot of philosophers are confused about the unborn for a variety of reasons. So I get it. I'm not judging you for it. I'm just saying, I think you're actually wrong. And if I'm right, then like 3,000 kids are getting killed every day. Like, that's bad. That's like a human rights injustice going on. And so I think it's kind of similar. I think like I'm making the same kinds of arguments that my female colleagues make. And so what do you think about that? Like, do you think maybe it's fair for me to say? And there is no silver bullet. There's never any silver bullet. But I'll tell you, I have had angry, like furious, purple-haired feminists calm down when they hear the thought experiment and be like, you know what? That's a good point. All right. Why are you pro-life? And we have a great conversation.
All right, you shocked someone in the chat moments ago. In fact, they started by saying, wait a minute. Did you just say there are atheists that are pro-life? How do they philosophically justify that human life should be valuable?
Yeah, so what's interesting is this is a huge, there's a cultural gap between Christians, especially like apologist types, like the people that are on this call, and atheists. Because I hear this question all the time, and secular pro-life is like the kind of big pro-life atheist group. And I'm really good friends with all of their people. We have like really good working relationship. I was actually just emailing with one of them today, like she's about to interview me for their blog or something. And I love those people. Their director is on our advisory board. They're awesome. And they get asked all the time, like, well, how can you ground your beliefs about like why human life is valuable? And their answer, whether or not you find it satisfying, is we don't really need to answer the deepest philosophical questions about that, because almost all atheists agree that it's wrong to kill innocent humans. And they're going to have different ways of explaining that. Some of them are utilitarians and will have a utilitarian attempt for explaining that. Some of them are, have other kind of objective, moral, ethical structures. Some of them aren't even thinking that deeply about it. They'll just be like, if you agree that killing humans is wrong, if they're innocent, then like we don't have to go deeper than that. The unborn are human. It's as simple as that. And that's kind of as deep as a lot of them go. Now, that's not very satisfying for really philosophical types that keep on wanting to go deeper on the metaphysical basement. And so as far as like what's really going on for them, it would depend on the atheists, but more and more atheists are coming from some kind of various kind of more objective worldviews. So like atheists, like a lot of people used to have these very subjective moral views. I mentioned moral relativism earlier. Moral relativism is dying a slow death. There are a lot fewer relativists now than there were 5 years ago. And relativism is being replaced by various versions of atheists' attempt to have an objective moral worldview structure. And they've got different ways of trying to make that work. Do I end up thinking it works as well as like a Christian deontological worldview? No, but they are less dumb worldviews than moral relativism.
So Josh, take us back to Portland Community College, and something you said very early in your talk that I wrote down and circled 5 times was be authentically curious. And how do you take that from being a tip to an action item? How do I, when I want to engage in a pro-life conversation, become authentically curious?
So that probably starts with something that you've got to do internally, which is to be able to truly respect and value this person. I think a lot of times pro-life people, and I will talk about myself too. Like I have had this problem. I didn't know it at the time, but I hit a point where after spending about a year in a private Facebook debate with the same pro-life and pro-choice people debating abortion, the same like 20 core people, as I became friends with them, I realized that I've been really good at humanizing the unborn, but I was not good at humanizing the pro-choice image bearer that was standing right in front of me. I was seeing them as kind of a goal, an object, a potential notch for my pro-life belt. And so we need to humanize them and understand that pro-life people are not all stupid. They're not all evil. It's not almost ever as simple as like they just love their sinful lifestyle too much like that, or they don't like babies or something like that. Like it's more complicated for them. And so trying to understand smart pro-choice arguments and where thoughtful pro-choice people are coming from is really helpful for that, because then it helps me to take this person seriously and think of them as kind of like a peer-to-peer conversation, as opposed to me like being this guru coming down from the mountaintop to show this person all the different ways that they're wrong. It comes with open-mindedness. It comes with a desire to, I want to see this person the way Jesus does. How does Jesus see this person? And I never attain that, but like I'm trying to, right? And then as far as like real action items that are external, is asking questions. Like you don't ask questions to someone if you don't care what the answers are, unless you're just like being like polite, but they can tell when you're just like asking questions, you're not interested in their answer because you're already thinking about the next thing you say. Like I have that happen. Awkward people do that to me all the time. Anyway, like don't do that. Don't be that person. Like ask a question if you really are interested in the answer, and then just listen and be able to kind of comment back and talk a little bit about their answer to show that you've been listening, and ask another question.
So let's talk about, you said a thoughtful person, right? This next question is going back to that Neo Matrix person. So I want to read this exactly as they wrote it, okay? Because again, the person you just talked about, that person you have a thoughtful conversation with, this is the opposite. The question is, you've had a lot of great tips for dialoguing with reasonable pro-choice people. Maybe that's most people, they say. But what dialogue tips do you have for talking to the truly evil, baby murdering types, Josh?
Yeah. So I do not think that you owe people to have a conversation with them just because they're willing to have a conversation with you. So I will try for a while to have a reasonable conversation with someone. By reasonable, like what I mean is like, ideally both parties are in this place of being open-minded and attempting to be reasonable in the way that they make arguments. We're not just like attacking each other's character. We're not being super fallacious in the way that we make arguments. Like we're both in truth-seeking mode and not just argumentative mode. I'm not interested in spending a lot of time with people who are just like on a crusade against the pro-life position because they're not open-minded. What's the point? If you're talking to a closed-minded person, it's kind of like playing tennis with a brick wall. Like you might get better, as a result of the time that you spent, but they're not changing. You are never going to change the brick wall, no matter how good you are at tennis. Now, I want to talk to open-minded people, people who are like actually open to changing their mind if they hear an argument that's better than theirs. And so if I end up having an unproductive conversation with someone who's just like flagrantly attacking my character over and over and over, or yelling at me or something like that, like I'll make a couple of attempts to like de-escalate things and like get them on track for having a better conversation. But at some point, if it's not happening, I will graciously end the conversation. And I have an article about this. I might grab the link and post it in the chat as you're asking the next question. But functionally, I'm trying to be very straightforward and honest and clear that I am ending this conversation. It might sound something like, okay, well, this has been interesting, or like I'll usually like how nice can I, how gracious can I be, or it's just been like, thank you for taking the time to share your thoughts with me. I'll take them into consideration, and I'm gonna have a different conversation now, or I'm gonna go do something else now. Like, goodbye, have a good day, like that kind of thing. And it's been really, I've been talking about this a lot in the last couple of years, because it's becoming increasingly clear to me that Christians need to get good at self-care.
Yeah.
And it can be really harmful to us if we just kind of, put ourselves in this martyr place where we're just like over and over and over, just letting people just shoot arrows into our heart. And we're just like, keep on beating me up. I'll keep it because I think that's what Christ wants me to do. Like, no, you don't owe it to people to let them treat you badly. Like, we shouldn't do that. We should draw boundaries. And if they're being a jerk, then stop having the conversation.
Josh, I love that. That's great. A quick question, and then another longer question about pro-choice folks. The question is, and I'm guessing this is an easy yes, but the person loves what you're saying about the 6 ideas and tips. You would agree these would be great for any conversation regarding faith and God and all.
These tips will make every conversation you ever have about anything better.
Okay, great. The question is, the next question, how do pro-choice folks argue that bodily autonomy trumps personhood? Why would we suddenly not have any responsibility to protect another life just because it's in our body?
Yeah, okay. So I'm going to grab a link because that is a huge question. I do entire lectures on this. Like, this is the main lecture that I give when I go onto a college campus. I'm going to speak to a mixed audience because this is hugely important to the abortion debate. I actually believe, so there's 2 categories. I mean, I'm being a little bit simplistic here, but there's mainly 2 different disagreements between pro-life and pro-choice people. Like, we don't disagree about whether poverty is wrong, whether rape is bad, things like that. But we disagree about fetal personhood, whether or not the unborn is a valuable entity like you and I, and then we disagree about bodily autonomy, and whether or not bodily autonomy trumps the right to life of the child. So the way that a bodily rights argument works is it says, even if pro-lifers are right that the unborn is a person, she should still have the right to have an abortion because it's in her body. And it would be a huge government overreach to force people to be life support machines for other people with their bodies. So we have a lot of materials on this. The link that I just posted is a landing page that was actually Secular Pro-Life asked us to make, and they link to it all the time. And it's got several articles and videos on it. For the sake of time, I will tell you one thing that one of the first things that I often say, but it's one of many, many, many things. It's not a silver bullet. There's no silver bullets. But I will try to demonstrate that bodily rights arguments necessitate extremism. And if this answer goes too fast for you, there's literally one of the articles on that landing page is that topic, and it explains it deeply. But basically, a bodily rights argument is an extremist argument. And here's what I mean by that. A bodily rights argument is saying something like a woman can do whatever she wants with anything inside of her body. Even if it's a person, she can kill it because it's in her body, and that means that the rules change. Well, if that's the way that a pro-choice person grounds their pro-choice argument, then that means that all abortions should be legal. You might not like a certain kind of an abortion, but you can't make it illegal because, so take late-term abortions. You can't say late-term abortions ought to be legal if a woman can do whatever she wants with anything inside of her body. Because where's the baby in the 9th month, in the 3rd trimester? It's still in her body. She can still do whatever she wants with anything inside of her body. And so their argument kind of forces them, they are stuck with an extremist abortion position. They've got to be for all the abortions being legal. And that is not where most pro-choice people actually are. So they have an internal contradiction going on. And I point that out and show them, like, you kind of got to choose. Like, if you're going to be opposed to late-term abortions and sex selection abortions and all those things that we've already talked about, because I've been asking clarification questions and finding common ground, if you're going to agree with this thing, you can't make a bodily autonomy argument, because in the end, then it should be illegal for her to do whatever she wants, right? And then they've got to choose. And one of a few things will happen. She will either abandon bodily rights arguments altogether and jump back to personhood. Fine, happy to talk about that. Or they will bite the bullet and be like, I guess you're right. I guess I do have to be for all the abortions. And even if that happens, this is still a win. Because in that case, and this has happened to me on campuses where they're like, you're right, I shouldn't be opposed to any abortions. Okay, I just got her to bite a huge bullet that she had to bite in order to stay consistent. But that's good, because then it's like, well, she walked up to the table with an inconsistent but comfortable pro-choice position. But she's going to have to walk away now with a consistent but very uncomfortable pro-choice position. And that's exactly what I want. I want them walking away like, oh my gosh, I had to say that to like try to win the argument. Like, that's not good. Like, that's what I want to be happening for them internally. And so that is one of the first things that I do when bodily rights arguments come up, but is far from the last. You should check out that landing page. There's some really good articles, podcasts. There might be a link to even a speech that I've given at Oregon Right to Life. If you look up my name on YouTube, I'm pretty sure Oregon Right to Life has a video of me talking about bodily rights arguments from one of the conferences. We have a lot to say about bodily. I'm glad you asked.
You did a good job not answering that question, like you said.
Doing my best.
I know, right? Okay, so I'm watching the time. We've got probably time for 2 more questions, Josh. And the first one is this. Someone watching tonight says, I believe life begins at conception, all abortions wrong, and best to avoid birth control. Most pro-choice people would consider these views extreme. The question is, do you let them know your full views if they ask, or do you keep some personal views back if you think they'll sound too extreme?
So just repeat the first part of the question again, the thing about birth control. What was that?
Yep. I believe life begins at conception and all abortion is wrong and best to avoid birth control.
To avoid birth control. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I'm a strategic pro-life person. And so I want to be authentic, but at the same time, I'm going to be strategic about what parts of my views I share and what things I don't share, at least like early in the conversation. And so like, I'm very strategic about talking about the things that I expect to be common ground. So I'm generally a political conservative, but I also have some beliefs on some political topics that a lot of conservatives don't agree with. And I strategically bring those things up when I'm talking to a liberal person on a campus, because there's going to be some common ground there. And that's going to make them very intrigued by me. Oh, that's interesting. You don't just believe everything that Ben Shapiro says. You agree with him on some things, and then you agree with other people on other things. Oh, that's interesting. And then we can have that conversation. I don't think that it is strategic for pro-life people to be fighting to make birth control illegal right now. We're not going to win that one. We need to be trying to convince pro-choice people that late-term abortion is so wrong it should be illegal in every state. If we can't get them convinced that it's wrong to take a 7-month-old fetus and dismember them, then we're not going to convince them that some birth control methods should be against the law, even if those birth control methods cause early abortions sometimes, maybe, which is more complicated than most people think too. But yeah, I do think that we ought to be strategic when we're talking, especially when we're talking to strangers. If I'm talking to a friend and I'm having a series of conversations, that's different. But if I'm talking to a stranger, I want to spend my time focused as much as I can on the core elements that pro-life and pro-choice people disagree on. And we're probably not going to have enough time to get to birth control.
And I'm wondering, would you agree that part of that is your push for authenticity? I mean, as part of that answer?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I'm definitely trying. I want them to feel like I'm definitely being authentic. about who I, so like by that, like, I mean, like sometimes I'm sharing some things even about like my personal life. I might talk about my kids or my wife or me being a musician, or like I'm going to try to find ways to connect with them, and share with them like what I really feel like. If the issue of rape comes up, for example, I'm not going to shy away from that. I'm going to give them a really good, thoughtful answer that shows that I am very compassionate for survivors of rape. And yet I do still think that abortion should be against the law in the case of rape. That's very authentic. And I'm answering, if they ask me directly, what do you think about birth control? I will give them a very honest answer, but I'm not like trying to like get into that part of the debate either.
Okay, quickly would be, have you ever seen, and we're on the topic of abortion tonight, have you ever seen a topic, someone's mind changed via a Facebook comment thread?
Yeah. In fact, Secular Pro-Life did a post a while back where they sort of had asked people on their own Facebook page, if you changed your mind about abortion, if you used to be pro-choice and now you're pro-life, tell us about why. And then they sort of like collected the answers and they posted them and categorized them. And there was a whole category of people who wrote to them talking about how they had changed their mind because of a Facebook debate. It doesn't happen, I think, a lot, but it does happen. This is why, like, one of the most important things to keep in mind if you are having a dialogue on Facebook is it's not just about the person you're going back and forth with. It's about the lurkers. It's about the people that are watching that conversation. And especially given like the COVID situation that we've had for the last year, like Facebook is one of the main places, or Twitter or whatever, that people are having these kinds of conversations. There are a lot of huge challenges to having conversations on Facebook. And in fact, I was literally in the process of filming a whole course about social media dialogue when COVID happened and we had to stop filming it. But if you're interested, if you look up the Equipped for Life podcast in whatever podcast app you use, in fact, I'll post a link to like a podcast webpage. We have, if you kind of scroll back through the archive, we've got like a series of 5 podcasts, topic episodes that we did on social media dialogue that have a lot of like very specific tips that I think are still the case. And then just also like post this too. If you're interested in getting kind of whatever newest articles and newest videos and podcasts we're putting out, I'll also just post a link to where you can kind of subscribe to that list if you want to kind of stay up to date with that. But yeah, people have changed their mind from Facebook exchanges. But usually the best thing, I'll end with this, the best way to do it is to begin your conversation with a pro-choice person, hopefully a friend on Facebook, and then transfer that conversation to a one-on-one medium. You do not want other people getting into it, and you don't want it to be a public thing because people don't want to change their minds in public. They'd rather do that in the safety of a private conversation. So an email thread or exchange or like Facebook private messages is better than a public forum. Even better is getting on the phone or doing Zoom like this. That's even better. I had a pro-choice atheist friend of mine. We were having 2.5-hour conversations on Skype because he was in Canada. Like we weren't even close to being in the same place, but we were having these conversations, and the body language and the tone of voice, it really makes a difference. And so he eventually became pro-life, and we eventually actually did a talk together in Portland. At the I forget what the campus was called, the University of Mary or something like that. And just talking about that friendship and how that really made a difference. So it started, in that case, it didn't start publicly, but a lot of my conversations with pro-choice friends have started in public, but then I transitioned them to one-on-one where they're going to be more likely to actually change their mind.
Awesome. All right, one more question for you, Josh. Before we get to that question, if folks are not seeing your links, they are in the chat right now, and Josh has been posting those as he's been answering tonight. The website also is equalrightsinstitute.com, and you can find podcasts and more information. Someone was asking, do you have books or anything on the website?
I don't yet. So we've made multiple like online courses that we prioritize over books. We made an online course on dialogue tips, including these 6, as well as the best pro-life arguments that we have found. So the equal rights argument that I mentioned earlier is like has changed more pro-choice minds than any other argument we've ever made. We've got an online course on that, and then we also have an online course on sidewalk counseling that we've made. So we've prioritized that over books. I have 3 books that I want to write, and it's kind of a thing where we are understaffed right now, and I don't have time to keep on making all the podcasts and videos and also write a book at the same time. So books are going to happen in the not so distant future, but I'm not actively working on one at the moment.
Okay. EqualRightsInstitute.com again is the way to get more for Josh. And also, before I ask this last question, and thanks to everyone, there's a couple of questions we're not going to get to tonight, but I do want to get to one more. But I want to remind everyone that's watching this Friday Forum to join us a month from now, February 19th. This will be our February Friday Forum. Derry Singh will be speaking on what does it mean to be made in the image of God. So that Friday Forum again is on February 19th, and we hope you'll join us for that. All right, so here, Josh, is the last question for you tonight. It seems like the why of abortion is largely ignored by pro-lifers, perhaps in an attempt to be respectful of women. Many secular surveys, though, show the number one reason women get an abortion is for financial reasons. Can't afford to raise the child, the impact of the rest of the life. If this is true, why doesn't anyone talk about that elephant in the room?
I mean, I feel like I talk about it in most of my conversations. Like, it comes up a lot. I mean, the financial reasons thing. Like, I think I believe that there have been some internal pro-life conversations. Like, I've had people ask before, like, well, why don't pro-lifers just front the money? Like, let's save some lives by just giving $5,000 to every woman who wants to have an abortion, if that'll save the life, or whatever. And there are a few pro-life ministries that do something like that do, sort of, just almost directly give money to or kind of like grants to women who are in need. Like, pregnancy centers also just like give a lot of practical resources to women. So we want to help women. There's kind of a philosophical question. So like in the sidewalk counseling course that we made, the sidewalk counseling masterclass, we talked about how it's sometimes a mistake to jump as a sidewalk counselor to like, let me solve all of your problems. Because as my colleague Jacob said, we want to give a hand up, not a handout. We want to teach people to fish, not just like hand them some fish and then call it a day. And usually like $5,000 is not enough really to fix whatever issue they're having. What they need is someone to hear them, hear about the problems they're having, and do their best to give them a hand up and not just a hand out, and help them see how they can face those problems without having an abortion, how they can hopefully get into a better situation. And so certainly there are some pro-life donors out there that are excited to just kind of give money straight to those people. But it's kind of like the difference, like, are you trying to stop abortion, or are you trying to stop abortions? And I think we should be doing both at the same time. And if you only just funnel money to women who might want an abortion, you'll probably be doing that until the end of time. So probably some of us should also be trying to end abortion at the same time, if nothing else, by making abortion unthinkable, which is kind of what I'm focused on doing.
And with that, Josh, thank you so much. Again, the website is equalrightsinstitute.com. Josh Brahm, thank you so much. We appreciate you being with us tonight. And for everyone else, we look forward to seeing you on February 19th. You can get more and sign up at the ambassadorsforum.com. Josh, it is nearly midnight there on the East Coast, so we'll let you go. For everyone else, thanks for being part of tonight, and we'll see you all in February.